Well, good afternoon and welcome to yet another episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts. If you like our content, please subscribe to the channel and share with your like-minded friends. To date, we have 4 series available for your review. First, the history of the English Bible, which includes many videos on a number of translations, both old and new. And we discuss as well translators, their qualifications, how they worked. For example, we cover the likes of John Wycliffe, William Tyndale, Erasmus, Martin Luther, and certain Bibles like the Great Bible, the Geneva Bible, the Matthew Bible, the King James Bible, and of course, more modern translations such as the American Standard Version, the Revised Standard Version, the NIV, the ESV, and on we could go. We cover single author translations as well. For example, Kenneth Taylor's Living Bible, E.J. Goodspeed's translation, the Moffat Bible, Richmond Lattimore's Gospels, and others. A second series we feature is entitled Manuscript Hunters and Collectors, and we have episodes with the likes of Robert Curzon, Tischendorf, the Sisters of Sinai, Grenfell and Hunt, Solomon Schechter, and we also look at some collectors like J. Pierpont Morgan, Charles Freer, Chester Beatty, Martin Bodmer, and our third series, which we continue today, Cities of the New Testament. And so far we have covered Jerusalem, Nazareth, Capernaum, Bethsaida, and Cana in Galilee. A fourth series, which is brand new and in its infancy, is Archaeologist Interviews. And our first was with Dr. Thomas McCullough, director of the excavations at Kirbet Cana, believed to be today the ancient biblical city of Cana in Galilee. So as of today, we have 81 longer form videos and 28 short form. This episode continues our series, Cities of the New Testament. And so, let's begin. In the Gospels, there are some cities which feature prominently in the life of Jesus and his disciples, and I'm thinking of 4 in particular. Nazareth, where he grew up, Capernaum, his home as an adult, Bethsaida, where he performed many miracles, and then, of course, Jerusalem. The Gospels never mention Jesus going to either Sepphoris, which was just 4 short miles north of Nazareth, or Tiberias, which would have been an easy trip for Jesus to make since he spent so much time along the shore of the Sea of Galilee with his disciples. Why not? That's a good question. But there is one city and region where Jesus visited only once with his disciples that we know of, but it is one where Jesus made some of his most memorable comments and most consequential statements. That would be Caesarea Philippi, and it is known today as Banias. We want to understand the history of this city and region, perhaps why it was chosen as a backdrop for Jesus' comments about Peter, the church, and the gates of hell. So we divide this episode into 3 parts. First, the history of the city. Second, what can we understand about excavations there? And thirdly, its significance as a possible backdrop for some of those very memorable and consequential statements that Jesus made about Peter. We zoom into the northernmost part of Israel, near the borders of Lebanon and Syria. Bear with us as we display a number of photos that help us understand the beauty of this region and its ancient heritage. Modern-day Banias, ancient Caesarea Philippi, is located at the foot of Mount Hermon in the Golan Heights. Today, it is one of Israel's most beautiful nature reserves, and it is called the Hermon Stream Nature Reserve at Banias. Here are beautiful springs, peaceful streams, waterfalls, caves, walking trails, a Roman-era bridge, and lookouts. And if you love nature and archaeology, then they both meet here in a beautiful way. I visited Banias in 2018, and so here are 8 photos that I took of the area around the grotto, the cave of Pan. Here's a crowd admiring the Cave of Pan, and next to it, various sacred niches carved into the rock face cliffs. Statues of various gods would be placed in these niches, and a temple dedicated to that god would stand in front of it. You can see Greek inscriptions on these niches. Here once stood a temple to Nemesis, another temple to Zeus, and another to the Emperor Augustus. So if you ever visit Israel, and you should, make a visit to Banias, one of your top sites to see. So, this is Banias now. But what was it like then? Let's go back in time a couple of thousand years. Caesarea Philippi has had several names throughout its history. The earliest known name was Panas, that's with a P, named after the Greek god Pan, who was worshipped at this grotto and sanctuary at the site which we've just seen. And just who was Pan? Pan was the god of the wild, the god of nature, of shepherds and flocks, of rustic music, and a companion of the nymphs. Pan has the hindquarters and legs and horns of a goat. During Augustus Caesar's reign, Augustus gave this region, then called Panias, to Herod the Great, his client king of Judea, in order he would bring Roman law and order to this region. It was to remain in the control of the Herod dynasty for more than a century. Josephus relates that Herod honored Augustus with his favor by building him a beautiful temple made from white stone near this site. The temple is known as the Augustaeum, one of three that Herod built to honor Augustus. The other two he built at Caesarea Maritima on the coast and Samaria Sebaste. After Herod the Great's death, his kingdom was divided among his three sons, one of whom was Philip, known as Philip the Tetrarch. Philip ruled over territories in the northern and eastern parts of his father's kingdom, specifically Iturea, Trachonitis, Batanea, Gaulonitis, Auronitis, and Panias. In 3 BCE, Philip renamed Banias to Caesarea Philippi in honor of Caesar Augustus and to distinguish this Caesarea from his father's own Caesarea, located on the coast. That Caesarea is today known as Caesarea Maritima or Caesarea by the sea. Sometime around 33 AD, Jesus visits the region of Caesarea Philippi with his disciples, where Peter makes his confession that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, recorded both in Matthew and Mark. This marks the northernmost extent of Jesus' ministry, and we'll come back to this later in part 3. From about 50 to 90 AD, Agrippa II, Herod the Great's great-grandson, rules the region, including Caesarea Philippi, and his palace there becomes a significant building, and its ruins remain to this day. In 61 AD, Agrippa II expands and renames the city to Neronius Arenapolis in honor of Nero. But Nero died in 68, and the city's name quickly reverted back to Caesarea Philippi, or Panias. The city did flourish under Roman rule in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, but when the empire was Christianized in the 4th century under Constantine, it became a center of worship and a pilgrimage destination. In the 7th century, Arab Muslims conquered the region, and the city became known as Banias with a B, the Arabic pronunciation of Panias. From the 12th through the 15th centuries, the Crusaders held the city for a short time on several occasions, but ultimately remained in Muslim control. Fast forward now to the 20th century when British troops drive the Turks out of Palestine. Following the British mandate, Banias is placed under French control in 1920. After the collapse of the mandates and the beginning of the modern states of Israel and Syria, violence overtakes the region in 1948. Forward to June 9th, 1967, when Israel wins the Six-Day War. And they forced the remaining population out of Banias, placing Banias under Israeli control within the new boundaries of the State of Israel. 10 years later, in 1977, the archaeological site of Banias was declared a nature reserve by the Israel Nature and Parks Authority and named it the Hermon Stream Nature Reserve. And it remains a popular tourist destination today. And when you visit it today, you're in that nature reserve. Now, let's turn to the archaeology of the site. The modern excavation of Banias begins with Professor Ehud Netzer, world-renowned archaeologist and authority on Herodian architecture. It was Netzer who discovered Herod the Great's mausoleum at Herodium in 2008. Netzer conducted 2 short excavation seasons at Banias in 1977 and 1978. His work focused on a specific building located about 100 yards west and southwest of that famous Cave of Pan, situated on a prominent ridge overlooking the springs and the Banias Plateau. He uncovered significant remains of walls constructed in the opus reticulatum style, distinctive net-like diamond patternwork of bricks. Nestor concluded that the building was the temple that Josephus said was built by Herod the Great and dedicated to Augustus, sometime around 15 BCE. But Nestor's identification has been challenged, most notably by J. Andrew Overman and his colleagues, who believe that Herod's temple to Augustus is really found at a nearby site called Amrit, just 2 miles from Banias. And Andrea Berlin, notable archaeologist who teaches at Boston University, believes that the temple was built immediately in front of the Cave of Pan. So we're looking at another inside archaeological debate, trying to understand the current location of an ancient site. But let's move on. In 1983, Moshe Hartal conducted an archaeological survey of Banias to define the extent of settlement in various periods. He investigated the western section of the Panas underground aqueduct from 1992 to 1994, which was built to supply the water to the city's expanding suburbs. Then beginning in 1988, Dr. Zvi Maoz directed excavations concentrated on the sanctuary of Pan. His work in this area, including exposure and preservation of remains, was ended in 1994 and was subsequently opened to the public. And from 1988 to the year 2000, Dr. Vasilios Safaris directed the second archaeological team at Banias. This project was called the Joint Expedition of Banias, and his team unearthed large parts of the Roman palace and located the city's Cardo Maximus, which is the main north-south street. The joint expedition involved the Israeli Antiquities Authority, the Nature Reserves Authority, and several universities from the United States and Greece. The work is documented in 2 volumes published by the Israeli Antiquities Authority, and I've linked to them in the description box. Incidentally, it was Dr. Safaris who in 1968 excavated a Jerusalem tomb that contained the bones of a crucified man named Yehochanan. Google that name for a fascinating story. Just Google crucified bones Yehochanan, Yehohanan. Then, in 2004, John Wilson published the first continuous history of Banias. In his book, The Lost City of Pan, Wilson tells of a 19th century visitor to Banias who didn't seem to think too much of the place. And the traveler had this to say, quote, "We entered this little execrable village of Banias, and on the next morning, during breakfast, the usual assemblage of squalid humanity sat patiently without the charmed circle of the camp, waited for such crumbs as pity might be bestowed upon their misery." He then commented on the appearance of the local villagers. Quote, "These people about us had other peculiarities which I've noticed in the noble red man, too. They were infested with vermin, and the dirt had caked on them until it had mounted to bark." Among his final comments were these, quote, The miserable huts of a little crew of filthy Arabs were perched upon the broken masonry of antiquity. The whole place has a sleepy, stupid, rural look about it, and one can hardly bring himself to believe that a busy, substantially built city once existed here, even 2,000 years ago. Those words are the observations of our beloved Samuel Clemens, aka Mark Twain, who visited the site in 1867. His remarks are recorded in his book, The Innocents Abroad, and the book was first published in 1869, and I'm showing you here the cover of the 1988 title page. And lest I forget, there were other 19th century visitors to Banias, some of them more sensitive than Twain. One in particular would be described in Wilson's book, The Lost City of Pan, and that would be Ulrich Yasper Sidson, who visited Banias in 1806 and noted the walls of the old fortress, the grotto with its cave and fountain, inscriptions along the red rock cliff dedicated to Pan and the nymphs. We spoke of Sidson in an earlier episode, and his travels have been an important part of the travelogues in 19th century Israel. Well, let's get back to modern day archaeological work at Banias. Since the year 2000, archaeological work has continued there and reveals new discoveries. Excavations in 2020 revealed a 2nd and 3rd century CE Greek inscribed altar dedicated to Pan by a pilgrim from Antioch. It was later incorporated into the walls of one of Israel's earliest Christian churches at Banias. And this, of course, highlights the shift from pagan to Christian worship at the site. Things dramatically changed in the 4th century with the Christianization of the empire, beginning with Constantine. Did we just mention an early Christian church at Banias? Well, yes, we did. That church, dating from roughly the 4th or 5th century CE, the Byzantine period, was discovered at Banias during excavations led by Professor Adi Ulrich and Ron Lavi of the Zinman Institute of Archaeology at the University of Haifa. They worked in cooperation with the Israel Nature and Parks Authority. The church was built directly atop a Roman-era temple dedicated to the Greek god Pan, the very deity from whom Banias gets his name. Archaeologists found remains of mosaic floors decorated with crosses and other Christian symbols, a repurposed pagan niche that became a church apse, and a large dressed stone covered in cross graffiti left by Christian pilgrims. The find was made public in 2020 after several seasons of excavation. The physical overlap of church atop pagan temple vividly illustrates the religious and cultural crossroads represented by Banias, and the way early Christians claimed a prominent pagan site for their own worship. In 2022, during excavation of the northwest quarter of Banias, archaeologist Yoav Lehrer and the Israeli Antiquities Authority uncovered a cache of 44 gold coins hidden in a wall, likely during the Muslim conquest around 635 CE. These coins spanned the end of the Byzantine period, featuring emperors Phocas and Heraclius, and they capture a moment in time during the site's tumultuous transition. In 2024, Dr. Adi Ulrich and Ron Lavi revealed that the sacred cave dedicated to Pan was dramatically repurposed by Herod Agrippa II, the late 1st century, into a Roman-style nymphaeum triclinium, which was an elaborately engineered banquet hall. This discovery confirmed literary accounts by Josephus and showcased unique local adaptations of Roman imperial culture. The excavations documented how water flowed through and around the dining space, providing both a dramatic setting and a technical feat of engineering. As we can see, Banias has been thoroughly excavated in the last 75 years, and we've only covered some highlights. Work is still ongoing, and I'm sure will bring new surprises and perhaps reinterpretations of old data. But let's move on to the last section of this episode. Why would Jesus intentionally take his disciples to such a region which is known to be a place of pagan worship? It seems that they avoided such cities as much as possible. Was the site deliberately chosen for his disciples to see with their own eyes the paganism vividly on display there? Or was it just a road trip with no special significance of sight in mind? Some claim Jesus wanted to show his disciples the abject paganism of the cave of Pan and all that it represented. He was here with his chosen 12 to give a show and tell teaching that he, his disciples, and their new movement would ultimately conquer paganism and forge a new path for humanity. So let's review the two passages in Matthew and Mark that bring us this story. First, Matthew 16, verses 13 through 20. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, but this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. And in Mark, the parallel passage, a more succinct version, Mark 8:27 through 30. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. What these two passages have in common is that they place Jesus and his disciples in the region among the villages of Caesarea Philippi and Banias. Surely this area was a departure from their normal itinerary in Galilee and Judea. Banias, or Caesarea Philippi, was some 25 to 30 miles north of Capernaum and would have taken perhaps 2, maybe 3 days to travel there. Some have said that the cave of Pan was actually the gates of Hades that Jesus were referring to while he was teaching his disciples, and that the reference to rocks by Jesus was on full display by the imposing rock cliff that they could have been looking at. Now, I will admit that definitely makes a good sermon, and I've heard it more than once. It does have a certain theological appeal to me. Jesus is Lord above all the demonic powers. But to be fair, it is not explicitly stated in the text. It's an interpretation, and maybe a good one. But what do you think? The location does beg the question, why would Jesus take his disciples to this region known for its paganism and worship of Pan, and ask them the question, who do people say that I am? I'll leave you with that food for thought as we wrap up today's episode. We have only skimmed the surface of the history and the archaeological work done at Banias. And so I've left a few links in the description box, many more detailed on my Substack, and please subscribe to my Substack. It describes the various excavation reports, links to academic and popular journal articles, videos that feature interviews with the principal scholars involved, additional sources that are also in this episode. And I do hope you found this helpful and informative. So please subscribe to the channel, share with your like-minded friends. Our next episode will continue the series on cities of the New Testament. Next city to be determined, but a hint. We're likely to be moving out of the Gospels into cities discussed in the book of Acts. Which city would you like to see discussed? Let me know your ideas, and especially of today's episode. What did you think? Is there things that I left out that should have been included? Are there mistakes that you think I've made? Issues that need further discussion? I want to hear all of it. So thank you so much for your comments along the way. Until our next episode, stay healthy, keep curious, always learning. And we'll see you in the next episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts.